We're in Job. Whoa. I'll try and speak softly. Okay. Heath at the controls. We're in Job chapter 32, and this is a continuation of the speech of Elihu. Elihu had obviously been present throughout the series of discussions between Job and the friends. In some cases there were discussions, in some cases the friends made their accusations, and Job just pointed out the faults in their reasoning. But Elihu was listening to all of this, and last week we looked at the beginning of his talk, and he turns out to be a very angry young man. Anger burns in him because the friends, so-called, had messed up. He thought that they were older and wiser enough to be able to convince Job that he must have been a serious sinner to have suffered so grievously. And they were totally unable. In fact, the third of the friends, Zophar, he just didn't even attempt to follow up on the third round of talks. And so he starts, we're in verse 11, he says, "Behold, I waited for your words. I gave ear to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I even carefully considered you. And behold, there was no one who reproved Job, not one of you who answered his words." And so he's saying, in effect, you all failed totally. Now, he has not arranged his words against me, nor will I respond to him with your words. So Elihu's going to take a new approach. The three friends were stuck with just one idea, that if you sinned, you suffered. If you were righteous, you were rewarded. So reversing that, if you see somebody who's suffering, what do you know? He's got to be a big sinner, okay? Just simple logic. They couldn't see any deviation from that at all. And they just hadn't thought about what was going on in the world. They hadn't noticed, as Job pointed out, that the wicked also prosper. So if their theory was correct, that should not have been. And they should have had some correction for that, but they didn't. And so Elihu says that Job has not considered what he is going to offer. So verse 15, he says, they are dismayed. They no longer answer. Words have moved away from them. I like the way this is expressed. They were at a loss for words, in other words. They had no clue how they should proceed. Shall I wait because they do not speak, because they stand still and no longer answer? I myself will also answer my share, verse 17. I also will tell my knowledge, for I am full of words. The spirit within my belly presses me. Behold, my belly is like unvented wine, not open, like new wineskins, it's about to burst. And that has nothing to do with what he had for supper. He's just talking about the fact that he was so full of words that he just couldn't stop himself from speaking. Sometimes you wish people who are full of words would stop themselves from speaking, because once they start, there's almost no way of escaping them. But that was not the impression he was giving. He just says, verse 20, let me speak that I may get relief. Let me open my lips and answer. let me now be partial to no one, nor flatter any man. For I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon carry me away. So he's saying all of that to say, I can't restrain myself for speaking. I've got to put my view forward. So he turns to Job in chapter 33. However now, Job, please hear my speech and give ear to all my words. Behold, now I open my mouth, my tongue in my mouth speaks. My words are from the uprightness of my heart, and my lips speak knowledge sincerely. So he believes he has something to say and that it's a righteous speech he's going to give. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Respond to me if you can. Arrange yourselves before me. Take your stand. And so he doubts that Job will be able to respond to what he has to say, because he's got a completely different point of view. So he's saying, you're not going to be able to handle it, but you need to listen. Behold, I belong to God like you. I too have been formed out of the clay. Behold, no dread of me should terrify you, nor should my pressure weigh heavily on you. So I'm just a guy like you, and I'm going to talk to you in human terms, so you don't have anything to worry about. He's trying to reassure Job. He's trying to give Job a way of handling this situation and coming to a greater understanding of what's been happening to him. So he's going to propose a different idea or different ideas than the three friends have brought forward. Surely you've spoken in my hearing, and I've heard the sound of your speech. And this, he's trying to paraphrase what Job has been saying. Verse 9, I am pure without transgression. I am innocent. There's no guilt in me. Behold, he finds reasons for opposition against me. He counts me as his enemy. And so he's saying, Job, because of your condition, the fact that you couldn't get to God and have him listen to you, you now feel that God is your enemy. And that must be an awful position to feel yourself in. That the God on whom you would rely for some relief or some answers is actually now your enemy. Verse 11, he puts my feet in the stocks. He keeps watch over all my paths. So that's the paraphrase of what Elihu understood Job to be trying to say. Now he takes up his point of view. Behold, let me answer you. You are not right in this. In other words, Job, what you've said has been wrong. So now you need to listen, and I'll fix it up and tell you what's actually happening. For God is greater than mortal man. In other words, God wouldn't stoop to unjust treatment. So he's not like mortal man. Mortal man, you'd almost expect unjust treatment, and that's in fact what he'd received from the friends. Why do you contend against him? For he does not give an answer for all his doings. In other words, whatever God does, he does on his own authority, and he doesn't have to give any direct answer to you for what he's done or why he's done something. So God's not answerable to man. And there may be times when you feel so distressed that you say, oh God, why are you doing this to me? Or why do you allow this to happen to me? And that's the approach that Job was taking. He couldn't understand why, with all his uprightness and righteousness, he should be suffering like this. So Job had also brought the theology that if you suffer, it's because you've been sinful. Or if you're sinful, you can expect to have suffering. So Job subscribed to the same thing. And he tried to answer on the basis of that theology. So God doesn't have to answer for what he does. Verse 14, indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one perceives it. In a dream, a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, while they slumber in their beds. And there are many examples in the Old Testament of people receiving messages from God in dreams. And some of the men understood immediately what God was trying to say to them. Others are puzzled by it. Others seek some help to try and decipher the dreams. And we have the same problem today. If you dream something at night, sometimes it seems so real that you wake up and you wonder what's happened. And there are a lot of people who specialized in interpreting dreams. And they have a whole system of interpretation, apparently. But I don't think anybody really knows the meaning of your dreams. And maybe we don't even ever understand why we dreamt a certain thing or why that came up. So that's what he's trying to put to Job. God speaks, in other words, in the form of dreams or visions at night. 16, then he opens the ears of man and seals in their discipline, that he may turn man aside from his conduct and keep man from pride. So these are two of the things that God is speaking to, trying to convince men that they have a problem with pride and ego, and this often results in conduct which is ungodly. Verse 18, he holds back his soul from the pit and his life from passing over to death by a weapon. So by means of dreams and visions, he tries to keep men from doing things or saying things that are going to cause him to be lost and cause his soul to go down into the pit. Now, another way that God speaks is outlined in verse 19. Man is also reproved, or rebuked, if you like, with pain on his bed and with unceasing contention in his bones. I like that. Anybody here suffering from contention within his bones? That refers to back problems or neck problems and maybe degeneration of your tissues and things like that. And this is one way that God is rebuking you. So our illness in Elihu's mind, now this is not an inspired revelation of why you get sick. It's Elihu's point of view that God is using this in order to discipline you or reprove you for something that you've done wrong. And so this contention in the bones, so that his life loathes bread and his soul favorite food. His flesh wastes away from sight, and his bones, which were not seen, stick out. Then his soul draws near to the pit, and his life to those who bring death. So this is the problem of a lot of these diseases. I have, as part of my diabetes, I've reached a stage where there is a lot of muscle wasting in my legs. And if Elihu was here, he would say that's because God is reproving me for something I've done wrong. And I may need reproving, but that's what Elihu would say. Verse 23, If there is an angel as mediator for him, 1 out of 1,000, to declare a man what is right for him, then let him be gracious to him and say, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found atonement. And so there might be a messenger or an ambassador from God to mediate for him. And that he would be a unique personality, 1 out of 1,000, to declare to a man what is right for him. In other words, to guide him. And so maybe God speaks to us through our pain in order to guide us into doing what is right. 25, let his flesh become fresher than in youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then he will entreat God, and he will accept him, and he will see his face with joyful shouts, and he may restore his righteousness to man. And so if God finds that Job has someone to intercede for him, then this would be a way for him to entreat God through this intermediary, and then God would accept him. Verse 27, he will sing to men and say, I have sinned and perverted what is right, but he has not done what is due to me. In other words, I sinned, but God has forgiven me. I didn't receive what it was due. But that would not be Job's particular feeling. Elihu is saying that there would be a case where a man would say, I have sinned, but I haven't received what is due to me, and therefore God has forgiven me. He has redeemed my soul from passing into the pit, and my life shall see the light. Verse 29, behold, God does all of these things twice, 3 times with men, to bring back his soul from the pit. So these interactions of God are to rescue man, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. Pay attention, O Job. Listen to me. Keep silent, and I will speak. Then if you have any speech, respond to me. Speak, for I desire to prove you righteous. If not, listen to me. Keep silent, and I will teach you wisdom. Here is Elihu. He's younger than any of the 3 friends, and yet here he's saying that I am the one who can help you. So you need to be quiet and pay attention to me. Not a very humble approach that Elihu takes. The young and the proud, and also the very angry. Chapter 34. And this is addressed firstly to the 3 friends. Elihu responded and said, hear my speech, you wise men, and give ear to me, you who know. For my ear tests words as the palate tastes food. So he weighs up every word that is said to see what value it has, what it's trying to convey. Let us choose for ourselves what is just. Let us know among ourselves what is good. In other words, we're going to determine what is good from God's point of view. So Elihu is electing to speak for God, to put God's point of view so that they can understand what's really true here. Job has said, I am righteous, but God has removed my justice. And so he's putting words in Job's mouth. In many cases, it's an accurate reflection of what Job has said. But listen as he continues. Should I lie concerning my justice? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. So this is the kind of protest that Job has made. And Elihu's response is, what man is like Job, who drinks up mocking like water? But he travels in company with the workers of iniquity and walks with wicked men. For he has said, it is of no use to a man when he is pleased with God. In other words, Job, you've quit your faith in God because it doesn't help at all. And so he is in company with the workers of iniquity. You're among the wicked people. Changed Job's classification. Because he accuses Job of having felt that it's no use trying to be pleasing to God because you just get ruined anyway. And many people feel that way, that you cannot please God, that God capriciously ruins your life, and there's no redress. You cannot speak to God and find out why this is happening, whether you've made any mistakes and what they are and how to correct them. Verse 10, therefore listen to me, this is Elihu speaking, you men with a heart of wisdom, far be it from God to do injustice and from the Almighty to do wrong. In other words, God cannot do wrong. And that's really our belief. But Job felt that he had been wronged by God. God was now his enemy. But he's setting him straight. Verse 11, and here's the Friends' theology coming up. He pays a man according to his work and makes him find it according to his way. In other words, you sin, you suffer, and if you do right, you're rewarded. Verse 12, truly, God will not act wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Who appointed him with authority over the earth, and who has laid on him the whole world? In other words, God is not appointed by man. There's no humanity that informs God how he should behave and what he should do. God was there before man was created. And so you can't question his acts because he will not act wickedly. It's just not in the nature of God. That's why we believe him to be God. Verse 14, if he should set his heart on it, if he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would breathe its last together, and man would return to the dust. So if God withdrew all his activity with men, where would we be? We would soon die, because it is the breath of God that keeps us alive. And so to accuse God of doing wrong is unwise, to say the least. You're going to talk about God's omnipotence now, and the fact of his omnipotence rules out the idea of partiality. God has all power. He can do with his power whatever he wills. But he's not going to act against his nature, which is goodness. Verse 16, if you have understanding, hear this. Give ear to the sound of my speech. Shall one who hates justice rule? And will you condemn the righteous mighty one, who says to a king, vile one, to nobles, wicked ones, who shows no partiality to princes, nor recognizes the rich above the poor, for they are all the works of his hands. And so we're all created by God. Why should he make one of us superior to another or more righteous than another? So God is absolutely impartial. Whatever happens, happens because God sees it as right, or it is something that God set in motion, which just has to continue. In a moment they die, and at midnight people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away without a hand. In other words, God is so powerful that death can be instantaneous from his hand. Then there's another factor to God, his omniscience. He knows everything about us, and therefore he can be an impartial judge. Our problem is that we cannot know enough about a man to make a righteous judgment. This was the problem of the three friends. They did not know the story of the Satan's appearance before God and his challenge to God that Job was only righteous because God protected him, put a wall around him. And if that was taken away, then Job would not continue to have faith in God. And then the same thing was repeated with regard to Job's physical body. Oh, you protect that, skin for skin. A man will give everything for his skin. And God said, okay, you can do what you like to Job, but don't take his life. And so, with all that befell Job, he felt as if he had been unjustly treated and wanted to speak to God about that. So from verse 21 down to 30, he's going to speak about the omniscience of God, which qualifies him to be impartial in his judgment. His eyes are upon the ways of men, and he sees all his steps. So God's knowledge is so complete. He knows when you're about to sneeze. He knows when you bruise your toe. He knows when you have a heart attack. He knows when it's just a light dose of flu or something like that. He knows everything about you. He knows more about me than any of you can guess. You only see part of me. You don't see all that's happened in my life. You don't see factors in my upbringing that might have changed my approach to God and altered how I believe about God. And you don't know about the illnesses I've encountered or that I've seen in my loved ones. And all of those factors may enter into how I behave, what I do. And you just see what I do and you make judgments on that basis. But you don't know all this other stuff. And so it says, he sees all his steps. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. He does not need to consider a man further, that he should go before God in judgment. So, Job, you're looking for a solution which doesn't exist and doesn't need to exist because God knows everything anyway. He knows why this is happening to you. He knows his purpose in it, and you don't. Verse 24, he breaks in pieces mighty men without searching anything out, and he sets others in their place. We see kings are taken out of the place and replaced with somebody else. And that's God's doing. And we don't know why he does it all the time. In some cases it becomes obvious, but in others it isn't. you talk about the Exodus, God knows Pharaoh's heart. It says he hardens his heart. And so he is going to take Pharaoh out of the way, but he's given him every chance to capitulate and obey God and do as God desires. Let the Israelites go. So he breaks in pieces mighty men like Pharaoh. Therefore, he recognizes their labors. He overthrows them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them like the wicked in a public place, because they turned aside from following him and had no insight from any of his ways. And turning aside from following God in the Proverbs is well illustrated. If you turn aside from God, following God's ways, you're going to end up in a mess. In fact, that idea that I'm not going to do what God wants done, I'm not going to follow God's ways or try to be righteous, I'm going to do whatever pleases me. And I'll decide what that is. I'll decide whether it's right for me. And if I decide it's right for me, that's it. There's no law that can say that I was doing wrong. And so that's turning away from following God. It's my feeling that there's an innate desire to follow God. And later in life, there are many things that may seek to alter that. In our culture today, there are many things that you will learn from friends. There are things that you will learn in school and in university that are turning you away from doing things the way God wants them done. And it all sounds logical, reasonable, beneficial, and so we try to do that. And we have a world which has really lost its moral compass because they turn away from God. And so we're deeply in need of correction of that. We need to refocus. And I think this is one of the works that the church should be carrying out, to help people refocus on the moral compass that is God and God's Word. And it's amazing how powerful that is, maybe beyond even our reasoning ability. If we can just get a person to read the Bible, they will, in many cases, be changed in a revolutionary manner. But back to the Bible is one of the messages that many of the prophets preached. Stop doing whatever it is you feel like doing, get back to the Bible. That's one of the huge messages in the prophet Isaiah. So, verse 27 talked about turning aside from following God. Verse 28, so they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, that he might hear the cry of the afflicted. So if he keeps quiet, who then can condemn him? So if he hides his face, who then can perceive him? He is above both nation and man altogether. So the godless men would not rule nor be snares of the people. The cry of the poor goes up to God. One of the burdens that Jesus placed on people is remember the poor, give to the poor. And that's one of the things that we sometimes neglect. We turn away from people who have a deep need because they're a nuisance, they're ugly, they're in the way. They make us feel guilty in some way. And we say, well, the government should take care of them. and the government doesn't. It makes very weak attempts, as if that will stop our criticism. Okay. Elihu's going to make some accusation against Job. Has anyone said to God, I have borne chastisement, I will not work destructively anymore. Instruct me what I do not behold. If I have done injustice, I will not do it again. So this was what Job wanted to know. He wanted to know whether he had done injustice in any way and how could he correct it. Verse 33, shall he repay on your terms because you've rejected it? For you must choose and not I. Therefore, say what you know. Men with a heart of wisdom will say to me, and a wise man who hears me, Job speaks without knowledge, and his words are without insight. Job ought to be tested to the limit because he answers like wicked men, for he adds transgression to his sin. He strikes his hands together among us and multiplies his words against God. This striking of the hands together is a kind of derisive action, according to the writer here. And so this is what's wrong with Job. Job speaks without knowledge, and he needs to be tested. And his words need to be tested as well. So Elihu continues in chapter 35, verse 2, do you think this is according to justice? Do you say, my righteousness is more than God's? You say, what use will it be to you? What profit will I have more than if I had sinned? And so this was attributed to Job. Verse 4, I will respond to you and your friends with you. This is now Elihu talking. He's going to make the response. And this is going to handle the friends as well. Look at the heavens and see and perceive the clouds. They are higher than you. If you've sinned, what do you accomplish against him? If your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? So your sins don't affect God. They don't hurt God. They may displease God, according to Elihu's thinking, but you're not injuring God because you sin. If you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? So in the same manner, the flip side of the coin, if you do righteousness, that doesn't give God some benefit at all. Your wickedness is for a man like yourself, and your righteousness for a son of man. So nothing that Job is going to do or has done puts God under any obligation. Just because he's acting righteously, God is not obliged to take away all his problems and to prosper him. Verse 9, because of many oppressors, they cry out, they cry for help because of the arm of oppressors. But no one says, where is God, my Maker, who gives songs of praise in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heaven. And so the oppressed people cry out, but they're not heard. They cry to God, and hope that they will have a blessing from God. But are we better than the beasts of the earth and wiser than the birds? Verse 12, there they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men. And so in crying to God for some relief, God does not answer. And one commentator says that this statement, because of the pride of evil men have taught us, or are trying to teach us, through the education systems of the world, that there is no answer from God. And so they're denying the value or the power of prayer and faith. And their influence is going to try and hinder men from trying to use them. So we want God out of the public square. We don't want the Ten Commandments in our courtrooms. We don't want signs of religion in any place owned by the government. We do not want the Bible read in schools. We want God ruled out completely. So anything government-sponsored cannot have God associated with it in any way. And they'll go to outlandish lengths to try and stop that. And so that's the problem, that nobody is crying out to God any longer. Surely God will not listen to an empty cry, nor will the Almighty perceive it. How much less when you say you do not perceive him? The case is before him, and he must wait. You must wait for him. Talking to Job, don't be impatient any longer. And now, because he had not visited in his anger, nor as he had acknowledged transgression well, so Job opens his mouth vainly. He multiplies words without knowledge. So Elihu condemns Job of trying to bring God into judgment. And that really was what Job was not wanting to judge God. He just wanted to present a case before God so that God could help him understand why he was suffering. He didn't accept the fact that he was suffering because of sins, because he knew what he'd been doing. So Elihu continues to speak in chapter 36. Verse 2, wait for me a little, and I will show you that there is yet more to be said in God's behalf. I will take up my knowledge from afar, and I will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. In other words, knowledge that is generally inaccessible, I have, and I'm going to share it with you. For truly, my words are not a lie. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. And so Elihu's saying, I am perfect in knowledge. Have you encountered people who know everything? Doesn't matter what you say, they know more about it than you do. Kind of becomes a little bit insufferable at times, because nobody knows everything, only God does. So we have to be careful not to give the impression that we're teaching people because we know everything. We know who's right and who's wrong. And of course, we know that everybody else is wrong because we're right. I mean, that's the whole reason that we meet separately from everyone else, because we don't mix with wrong-headedness and people who are wrong. We're the ones who know what's right. So this is Elihu's point of view. Verse 6, he does not keep the wicked alive, but he gives justice to the afflicted. Because Job had said, I've seen the wicked prospering and doing well. So that is not in keeping with your viewpoint that the wicked people are suffering because they're unrighteous. And I've seen wicked who are not suffering. So what's that about? And so Elihu is saying that your statement that the wicked prosper is wrong. We have to reject it. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous. So, in other words, he's not unaware of righteous people, and he is going to look after them, in spite of what you're saying, that you, a righteous person, are not being looked after. You're suffering. Verse 8, if they are bound in fetters and are caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they have magnified themselves. He opens their ear to discipline and says that they return from wickedness. And so God sees unrighteousness in people. He declares it to them through what they are suffering, and he opens their ear to discipline, so he helps them understand this is a discipline from God. It's not just a punishment that will end your life. I'm disciplining you, and the object of that is to bring you back into a righteous path. And so he says in verse 11, if they hear and serve him, in other words, they respond to God's discipline, then they will end their days in prosperity and their years in pleasure. But if they do not hear, they shall pass away by a weapon, and they will breathe their last without knowledge. King James Version, in place of weapon, has sword, but the particular Hebrew word used there relates more to a missile which is thrown, and some speculate that there was some kind of short sword or even dagger that you could throw. So it's a sword that you could throw. I didn't know they had them back then, but apparently they did. Verse 13, but the godless in heart lay up anger. This is a reference to the hypocrite. The hypocrite lays up anger. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life perishes among the cult prostitutes. He delivers the afflicted in their affliction, and that probably would be better translated, delivers the afflicted by their affliction, and opens their ear in time of oppression. Then indeed he enticed you from the mouth of distress, instead of it a broad place with no constraint, and the comfort of your table full of fatness. And that doesn't mean that the people were rotund, but it's just full of richness or abundance. In other words, the table was just groaning with a load of food on it. That's what he's talking about, in your fatness. Verse 18, beware lest wrath entice you to scoffing, and do not let the greatness of the atonement turn you aside. There's a lot of debate on the meaning of this particular verse. There are some verses which are very difficult to understand, and this is one of them. And I won't do more than just suggest a couple of ways of looking at it. Beware lest wrath entice you to scoffing, or in place of scoffing, indignation. Don't let your anger make you indignant about the way God has treated you. Do not let the greatness of the atonement or the ransom or what you're going to have to do turn you aside. So the greatness of what you need to do to recover from your sins, don't let that deter you. Will your cries keep you from distress, or all the forces of your power? Again, verse 19, this word for cries has a very dubious meaning. So we don't really understand how it's translated or how it should be translated. Do not long for the night when people vanish in their place. That's probably the night of extinction, when people vanish, night raids that destroy people. Be careful, do not turn to wickedness, for you have chosen this to affliction. So the affliction was intended to correct Job, according to Elihu's thinking. Don't take any of these statements by Elihu as the truth from God. So you've got to be careful not to put words in Elihu's mouth. Elihu's all over the place. And a lot of what he's saying is just nonsense. You have to understand he's taken an approach which is contrary to the friends, and he hopes that this will be helpful to Job, but he's fumbling around in the dark, really. He doesn't know what he's saying a lot of the time, but he thinks he's very wise. Behold, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has appointed him his way? And who has said, you have worked out unrighteousness? So who criticizes God? Who has criticized God? Well, it turns out a lot of people have and do today, and try to embroider falsehood out of a lot that is said about God. So we need to recognize God's wonderful works. 24, remember that you should exalt his work, of which men have sung. All men have beheld it. Man looks from afar. Behold, God is exalted, and we do not know him. The number of his years is unsearchable. That's because of God's eternity. It's a thing we cannot understand, life without ending. And this is the very nature of God. So we exalt God. We know that he's far above us. And here are things God does that in the time of Job, men did not understand. He draws up the drops of water. They distill rain for his stream, which the clouds pour down. They drip upon man abundantly. Can anyone discern the spreading of the clouds, the thundering of his pavilion? Behold, he spreads his lightning about him. He covers the depths of the sea. For by these he judges people. He gives food in abundance. And so he's talking about an approaching lightning storm. And I just read the last two verses and we've finished this chapter. He covers his hands with lightning. He commands it to strike the mark. Its thundering declares about him the cattle also, concerning what is coming up. So apparently, as he was speaking or writing this, there was an approaching storm. a lot of lightning, a lot of thunder. And included in this is some great difficulty in understanding exactly what he's talking about. And so next time we'll pick up in chapter 37, but understand that in the original text there's no break between 36 and 37. The speech just goes on. Whoever was dividing this into chapters said, we'll make a chapter here so it isn't too long, and it kind of breaks into the middle of the thought. But we'll continue with chapter 37 next time.